Hello and welcome. You're watching News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. On the show, we're going to talk about yet another irritant in the India-Canada relationship. Canada's tacit support to anti-India activities, the Khalistani movement in particular, has time and again emerged as an irritant in India-Canada ties. In another shocking provocation, there was recently a celebration of the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in the Brampton city of Canada. Congress leader Milind Deora tweeted a video of a float at a parade in Brampton depicting the assassination. Deora wrote on Twitter, and I quote, "As an Indian, I am appalled by the 5-kilometer-long parade which took place in the city of Brampton in Canada depicting the assassination of Indira Gandhi. It's not about taking sides, it's about respect for a nation's history and the pain caused by its Prime Minister's assassination. This extremism deserves universal condemnation and a united response." The parade was organized by Khalistani supporters on the 4th of June, 2 days ahead of the 39th anniversary of Operation Blue Star on the 6th of June. Other Congress leaders, including Jairam Ramesh and Shashi Tharoor, also tweeted terming the incident despicable and demanding that the Indian government strongly take up the matter with Canadian authorities. At a press conference today, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar read the Riot Act to Canada over this issue. The minister said, "Frankly, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. It is not one issue, no matter how egregious it may be. There is a larger underlying issue about the space which is given to separatists, extremists, and to people who advocate violence." The minister warned it is not good for the India-Canada relationship and it's not good for Canada. Canadian High Commissioner to India, Cameron Mackay, tweeted saying he was appalled by the reports of this event in his country, adding there is no place in Canada for hate or for the glorification of violence. "I categorically condemn these activities," he said. However, this is certainly not the first time that anti-India activities have been allowed and condoned in Canada. In September last year, over 100,000 Canadian Sikhs voted in a so-called Khalistan referendum in Ontario. It was organized by pro-Khalistani groups, especially Sikhs for Justice. In March this year, India's External Affairs Ministry had summoned the Canadian High Commissioner over a violent protest by Khalistani elements outside the Consulate General of India in Toronto. Over the years, Canada has increasingly become a hub of anti-India separatists. The current Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has drawn widespread criticism for not only staying silent on the Khalistani separatist movement in that country, but also for actively engaging with them and courting them for political support. The question is, have things gone too far this time? Will Canada act against the organizers of that objectionable parade? How should India deal with this issue?
I think there's a bigger issue involved. And the bigger issue involved is really the space that Canada has continuously and frankly to us, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. Because if you look at their history, I mean, you would imagine that they learn by the history and they wouldn't like to repeat their history. So it isn't only one incident, however egregious it may be. I think there is a larger underlying issue about the space which is given to separatists, to extremists, to people who advocate violence. And I think it's not good for the relationship, and I think it's not good for Canada. The phrase which came to my mind was actually a Hindi phrase, which was "Ulta chor kotwal ko dante." I mean, if anybody has a complaint, we have a complaint about Canada. You know, what I said earlier, the space that they're giving to Khalistanis and to violent extremists. So I was very perplexed by what I heard.
Any assassination or murder is a crime in every democratic process or any democratic governance. So something which is an offense cannot be celebrated, and thus all that is happening in Canada falls within the purview of law and order, and the government of the day and the society must act upon it, else it becomes a reflection of that very society where such things are happening.
All right. So how should India respond to this? Of course, as we mentioned, India's External Affairs Minister did hit out at Canada today, but the Congress government has said that the government of India must strongly take up this issue with the Canadian authorities. Is a condemnation issued by the Canadian High Commissioner enough? Far from it. Let's bring in our guests at this point. I'm joined by Ambassador Deepak Vora, former diplomat, and Rabinder Sachdeva, President at the Imagine India Institute. Ambassador Deepak Vora, let me start with you. As I mentioned, this isn't the first time that there has been a provocation of this nature, with Canada not just condoning, but actually actively encouraging, one would think, anti-India activities on its soil. The latest provocation being this extremely distasteful float that depicts the assassination of Indira Gandhi, our former Prime Minister, and it would seem as if this was a celebration. How are things like these being allowed by Canadian authorities? Time and again, there's been this so-called referendum by Khalistani groups in the past. There were violent protests outside India's Consulate General in Toronto earlier this year. The list goes on, and all we get is a condemnation from the Canadian High Commissioner. Surely the Justin Trudeau government needs to do more.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Always a pleasure to be with you on your channel. I learned so much from you. You put it across so well. And then I see my colleague, Mr. Sachdev, is there. His knowledge is much greater than mine. When Maverick Justin Trudeau was re-elected Canada's Prime Minister some years ago, I did not know whether to congratulate him or to feel sorry for his country. Canada is a funny nation, large country, small population, huge ambition, sits at the G7 high table of rich democratic nations, even though it should not be there. Now, despite its eagerness to make a mark in every international issue, ma'am, no one takes Canada seriously. You know, when I reflect on Canada's foreign policy, I'm reminded of Joseph Stalin's question to Winston Churchill at the 1944 Moscow conference. Churchill is supposed to have said, we went to war with Germany because it occupied Catholic Poland and we have good relations with the Vatican. And then Stalin interrupted and said, how many divisions does the Roman Pope have? Now, the Canadian Prime Minister a couple of years ago, the same character, Justin Trudeau, he was begging us for made in India antivirus vaccines. We responded graciously that we would see what we could do. When you talk of America, everyone thinks of the USA. Canada's own unity is very fragile. Do you remember, ma'am, the almost successful Quebec independence referendum of 1995? Then we had all these characters last year, thousands of fellows who moved on to Canada's parliament protesting the vaccine mandates and so on. And Trudeau Saab didn't know what to do, so he went into hiding. Why does he tolerate this nonsense? Three reasons: commercial interests, local political requirements, and ignorance. Khalistan insurgency has no support inside India, but still some support within the diaspora. Who benefits? Not the Khalistanis, nor their hosts who use them. Dr. Jaishankar has put it across very, very clearly, meaning that the hand that feeds terror will be the first to be bitten. And I think that we have taken the right approach. We will gradually escalate our response to this. At the moment, the High Commissioner here has said something. We are waiting for Shri Trudeau to come out with something and condemn this. Will be totally distasteful. Nobody in the world, as you rightly said, will condone violence, will condone murder, will condone assassination. In fact, judging by the recent incidents of violence against members of the Sikh community in Canada, it is becoming an assassination, where assassins run around pretty freely and get glorified and celebrated like that. Should be a wake-up call for the Canadians. If we wish to hit back, ma'am, and gradually escalate our response, it will hurt them much more than it'll hurt us. We really don't care about Canada. There's nothing that they can give us apart from some technologies which are also available elsewhere. What I do observe, however, is that as we rise, as India's global profile goes higher and higher, there are some elements outside the country who get very upset. You know, whether it's the G20 presidentship or the latest Morgan Stanley report on how well India has done, or the IMF report, some people get very offended because they're brought up on stories of India being a beggar, of India starving, of India not able to get its act together. Justin Trudeau was one of those, incidentally, growing up on the lap of his late father. He heard all these stories. So now the reality of the new India stares them in the face and they are totally confused. I would say, at best, Shri Trudeau is confused. At worst, he's a two-faced Janus and a hypocrite.
Okay. What is unfortunate, of course, is that India and Canada are two liberal democracies that actually enjoy friendly ties. And for the Justin Trudeau government to allow such activities on Canadian soil, as was very rightly pointed out by our External Affairs Minister, not only hurts India-Canada ties, it is not good for Canada either. Before I go across to Rabinder Sachdeva, let me just mention a few important facts here. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, while hitting out at Canada today, said, frankly, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. It is not one issue, no matter how egregious it may be. There is a larger underlying issue about the space that is given to separatists, extremists, and to people who advocate violence in Canada. Let's tell our viewers something interesting. Justin Trudeau has drawn widespread criticism for not only his silence on these anti-India activities that have taken place on Canadian soil over the years. He, in fact, has been seen as actively engaging with and courting some of these Khalistani elements. In the 2019 Canadian federal elections, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party got 157 seats. That was 13 seats short of the majority mark. To form the government, his party sought the support of the New Democratic Party, which was led by Jagmeet Singh Dhaliwal, a separatist whose visa request was denied by the Indian government in 2013. Rabinder Sachdeva, in light of these developments, and as I said earlier to the ambassador, it's not just about this objectionable and highly distasteful, parade projecting the assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. There was this so-called referendum on Khalistan held in September last year in Canada. In March this year, there were violent protests held outside India's Consulate General in Toronto. The list goes on. And there are examples of how the Prime Minister, no less, of Canada has actively courted these anti-India elements. The point here is, not only, of course, does it reflect double standards on part of Canada, which, prides itself on being a liberal democracy. But, at the end of the day, the larger question is, how should India deal with this issue? Yes, we've issued démarches, we have lodged formal protests with the Canadian High Commissioner. This time, the High Commissioner has issued a condemnation, but this is far from enough. How should India deal with this?
Thank you very much. I will actually prescribe something to your question. I'll say two things, which I can suggest, multiple others. One, a short term, and second, a long term. Before I get into that and the long term, what should be done, we should realize that when Minister Jaishankar says that it's vote bank politics, okay, remember, these vote banks are going to increase in Canada. The numbers of immigrants and our Sikh brothers and sisters is increasing in Canada. So then would it mean, and it would mean, that this would grow in Canada, which needs a long-term solution. Okay, and the long-term solution is, as all long-term solutions are, something soft, undefined, but we have to have bigger outreach within the Sikh diasporas in Canada. Right, their newer generations are, as Ambassador Vora was mentioning also or alluding to, and we can all see, the younger generations are moving away from India, not only emotionally, but even unhappily with respect to India. So that's a long term. The short term is the police systems in any countries where we have larger number of our brothers and sisters from Punjab, especially let's say these four right now, US, Canada, Australia, England, the local policies there should be informed that whenever any Indian or let's say related organization approaches you for any police permission, because they do approach sometimes for demonstrations, even this Canada thing, they must have taken a regular permission. Okay, whenever anybody approaches you for a permission, you got to look at it through a microscope. Okay, Now, this Canada thing being a case in point, fine, what would happen? Let's look at things, what's happening, the nuts and bolts. Somebody must have approached for permission to say that we'll lead a parade marking the celebration or whatever, something. Fine, you get the permission. Now, who has thought earlier to see that what would be the slogans or the, what would the tableau convey? I mean, that's oversight, ignorance, or maybe you could say that's where the higher levels, what Minister Jaishankar and India says and Prime Minister Modi says, the more we talk to these ministers and the prime ministers in these countries, the more it should percolate down from their top levels down to their local provinces and the local police and intelligence systems. That's something I would say is practical today in a tactical basis, right? But in the long-term basis, we need to win back or figure out ways other than just condemning what's happening and other than just condemning what's happening and in a way, spreading. See, another thing which is happening through all of this, wider and wider is the spread of the idea of khalistan within the Sikh diaspora spreading. So we got to prevent that and, win over hearts and minds, whichever way. A lot will be public diplomacy and all. Now, I'll give you one example of something practical. The first step I was saying. Now,
but I'm not
PM
sure,
Modi
Mr.
is going to
Sachdeva, if
Washington.
you can win over the hearts and minds of extremists and whether that should even be a priority for any government, frankly.
No. I'm not saying extremists, Neha.
So, but the focus here is
No,
clearly on
let
these
me complete that.
extremist elements, the separatists who are carrying on with anti-India activities,
Please let me
particularly on
answer.
Canadian soil. We are talking about how India needs to deal with it at a diplomatic level, at a bilateral level with Canada, and how it needs to be impressed upon the government of Canada that they need to crack down on these elements. I'm sorry, sir, but I beg to differ with you. This debate is not about winning the hearts and minds of
Neha,
separatist elements.
Give me 15 seconds.
But sir, I'm just saying you are deviating. This is what we are discussing.
Fair enough. You may, but give me 15 seconds to complete what I'm saying. There's a pipeline out there. The extremists are, let's say, 2 out of 100. The sympathizers are 20 out of 100. Out of these 20, sympathizers arise and come the extremists of tomorrow. We have to reduce this pool. I'm not saying that any extremist can be won over by hearts and minds. I'm saying it's a long-term process. This pool, which has sympathy, should be reduced or should reduce. Only then the actual number who are picking up arms and devising such evil schemes will reduce. I rest my case. Thank you.
All right, but I will reiterate that I'm pretty sure India has no interest in winning over the hearts and minds of people who celebrate the assassination of Indira Gandhi. And that is primarily what we are talking about. And the fact that a country like Canada, which calls itself a liberal democracy, with which India has shared friendly ties over the years and decades, actually allows and, condones. So let me go back to Ambassador Deepak Vora. Ambassador Vora, every time an anti-India activity of this nature takes place, let's say on UK soil or on Canadian soil, the response that we often get is, oh, but we are liberal democracies, we allow space for all strands of opinion, we encourage and allow space for democratic protest. But isn't that a very disingenuous argument? When somebody celebrates the assassination of a former prime minister, surely you cannot look at it or dismiss it as an innocuous democratic protest. And I've asked this question in the past. What if India were to start giving space to the IRA to hold a quote-unquote peaceful democratic protest at India Gate here in Delhi? And even Milind Deora says this is not about taking sides. It's about respect for a nation's history and the pain caused by its prime minister's assassination. This extremism deserves universal condemnation. Surely these countries can't get away with saying, but we're just allowing peaceful protests because we're liberal democracies.
That's a hackneyed argument. You're so right, ma'am. You put it so eloquently. This is arrant nonsense. Wasn't it 3 years ago that the same character, Justin Trudeau, had the Canadian First Nation, the original inhabitants of Canada, activists who were protesting peacefully against a proposal for a natural gas plant in their territory. They were forcibly removed and the police beat them up and so on. So what happened to the right to protest? Again, do you remember the farmers' protest? He sort of gratuitously said, Canada would stand with the Indian farmers. What did the Indian farmers want? They wanted to continue their subsidies. And in the World Trade Organization, Canada goes around saying India should not subsidize its farmers. The man has lost his marbles. But the response that we should have, ma'am, I believe in diplomacy, we would go in a graduated way. First, we'll have to put a hold on trade relations with Canada, not allow it to increase, so to speak, Canada's exports to India. The second level would be visa restrictions. The third, we're a very large number of foreign Indian students going to Canada. They pay billions of dollars in fees. We've already issued an advisory once last year saying, watch out for racially motivated attacks and so on. The Canadians got very upset. Perhaps we have to remind them that we are capable now, the new India, of hitting back where it hurts, and it hurts most when you kick them in the stomach. That is in business and commerce. So I believe that is what is going to happen. Canada will learn its lesson and will try and quietly crack down. You can do it while screaming from the rooftops that you're a liberal democracy. The freedom of expression is not the freedom to abuse. That has to be understood. And coming to India, as this guy did, bringing some Khalistanis in his delegation, going off somewhere, putting on a kurta and dancing the bhangra, that doesn't impress
In
anybody.
fact, if you
Once
remember,
again,
Ambassador, I'm very glad you've raised this issue of Justin Trudeau's visit to India. It was actually termed by many foreign policy watchers as a diplomatic disaster and a total embarrassment. Not only because of his over-the-top outfits, which resembled Bollywood sets more than anything else, but primarily because, you know, it was felt that the Indian government and the Prime Minister had actually dealt a snub to Justin Trudeau for these very reasons. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ma'am, I've been in diplomacy 50 years and counting. I know the kind of snubs we gave the fellow. And if I were in his place, I would have probably fired my High Commissioner for not guiding me properly, assuming that the High Commissioner didn't guide him properly. But yes, we gave him very strong snub. We told him directly as well as indirectly through our actions what we thought of him and his actions. But the man didn't listen. Ma'am, do you remember the Bali summit of the G20 when that Chinese fellow Dingling cornered this guy or sort of met him in an ambush meeting somewhere and said, how dare you share with your media the kind of discussions we've had? And then Trudeau issued a lame excuse, but we are a free country and a democracy. And Ping Pong said, well, our confidential discussions were not meant to be released. And if you remember the image, and we are trained to observe the body language, he looked like a schoolboy who had been chastised.
Yes, that video went viral. It did.
Cookie jar. You know, he was looking very uncovered. He was looking almost constipated at the time that Ping Pong fired him. So this guy just doesn't learn his lesson. Probably he's a masochist. He wants more punishment. But if India hits back on trade, on visas, and on student travel, I'm sure Canada will come around. They always do, ma'am. Kick them, they'll behave themselves. Winning hearts and minds belongs to the 14th century, not to the 21st century of a new, vibrant, strong India.
All right. So you were saying hit them where it hurts. That's very interesting, Ambassador. But also in terms of formally taking this up with the Canadian authorities, what do you think needs to be done? Of course, India's External Affairs Minister has already, today issued a strongly worded statement saying this is not good for India-Canada ties, this is not good for Canada, and, nobody would do this unless, such an act was driven completely by political considerations. But beyond this, going beyond these statements, what do you think India needs to do to register the strongest possible protest? First the ambassador and then Rabinder Sachdeva.
Normal thing would be for our ambassador to go to the foreign ministry and lodge a very strong protest. That is the diplomatic protocol. We'll summon their high commissioner. Our high commissioner there
maybe
will do
issue
it.
a démarche?
Maybe absolutely will.
Yeah.
All this, ma'am, adds up over a period of time. We'll summon the High Commissioner here and tell him. And then if we want to get really tough, we exclude the fellow here from all kinds of events and functions and so on, conveying our displeasure. There are many ways in diplomacy of doing it. Not inviting him to various functions, etc., is one way. But we're a very graceful people, very gracious nation. We wouldn't want to humiliate the guy publicly, but we'll make our displeasure known in many, many ways. I think they'll get the message loud and clear. This probably was the last one it's overreach by these Khalistani fellows and has earned them universal condemnation. And many people are saying, are these the guys who go around celebrating the assassination of leaders? Well, then we don't want them in our countries. This is
Exactly. I mean, I think this has gone way too far. Rabinder Sachdeva, you know, it is one thing to say we allow space for dissent and protest because we are a liberal democracy. But to allow celebration of a country's, you know, of the assassination of a country's prime minister and to still call yourself a liberal democracy, I mean, that cannot be acceptable to anyone at all. Mr. Sachdeva, what kind of a message do you think India needs to send out?
Ambassador Vora said a démarche should be the first immediate one, which should be out there. I'll again come back to what I was talking initially, that on a tactical front, whichever way pressure be applied, signals be given, as Ambassador Vora very eloquently highlighted, so that the Canadian government, the higher levels, pass it down to the lowest levels of the law enforcement to carefully examine with a microscope any future application for a public gathering or something like that. That would bring down some such incidents. Just to give an example, I'm drafting a letter right now, which I think in the next 2 or 3 days we are going to send to the Capitol Police in Washington, D.C. Okay, warning them or suggesting them that some things like these could happen. Kindly please be aware and give permissions accordingly, because we can anticipate with Modi ji's visit there will be some demonstrations for which permissions might be sought, and those permissions will be given. So away from the White House or wherever, etc. So we just want the law enforcement to be more careful to reduce these in the future. So that's one thing which has to percolate down to reduce these on the ground things which are happening. Talking of the Canadian visit of Trudeau, I'm reminded a very close friend of mine, a colleague in fact at our think tank. She was part of the Justin Trudeau delegation, and she personally, she was accompanying him in all his high-level meetings. I met her the day they were leaving in the night, the night they were leaving back, and she was telling me that everybody in the delegation was down in the dumps. They had clearly taken the message which were given to them, and they were all in a sullen, dark mood. That's what she told me.
We can all agree. It was a royal snub, no doubt. It was a royal snub that was dealt to the Prime Minister of Canada, but as Ambassador Deepak Vora says, he seems to learn no lessons. And I certainly believe that this time the Canadian authorities have gone absolutely too far to allow something as appalling as this on your soil. The celebration of the assassination of a prime minister, the prime minister of another liberal democracy and a friendly country like India. That's absolutely unacceptable, and it's downright hypocritical that the Canadian authorities allow this on the one hand, and on the other, the Canadian High Commissioner issues a condemnation claiming there is no room for hate in Canada. Well, High Commissioner, it is time you told your Prime Minister and his government to walk the talk. On that note, Ambassador Deepak Vora and Rabindra Sachdeva, thank you very much for joining me on the show. Thanks to the viewers for watching.